Okay. So, thank you all for coming today. It's lovely to see you all, some of whom I recognize, some of whom it's nice to meet. And this panel is called To Be Continued. I have everything but the description I wrote of it 6 months ago, but that's in your packet. And the gist of the panel is we're here to talk about serialized comic strips. I was going to introduce everybody formally, but again, you have our formal introductions in the program. So I thought I would do something else and just introduce these people, all of whom I admire and love, mostly from afar, and for about the last 25 years. I thought I'd just introduce them the way I think of them, if that's okay with you. So, quick introductions, and then we'll go to the panel. Is that okay with everybody?
Yes.
Sure. Okay. So, I'm going to start with Ed Luce, who I know personally the least of the panel, and that brings up an interesting thought for me, because when I became aware of Ed's work 4 or 5, 6 years ago, I was startled by the originality of it, and I still am. It's startlingly original, creative work. He starts by telling you a story that you recognize and that you are familiar with, and then he bends you in directions that you are very surprised to be going in and surprised to be enjoying yourself in. And it's sort of, I hate when this is the sort of publishing agent thing where they say, oh, it's like, who's the woman, the girl in London who dates a lot? The
Bridget
movies.
Jones?
Yeah, Bridget Jones. You know,
I knew that.
Ethan Green is like Bridget Jones, only gay, and so forgive me for doing that, but I'm going to do a little of that right now.
Where were you for my jacket blur?
When I think of Ed, he, like I say, he bends you in directions you don't expect to go. You think of movies, I think of Wes Anderson, but deeper than that, I think of Miles Davis. You just had no idea that you were going to be here and be so into it. So that's.
Thank you. That's awesome.
Allan Neuwirth, who is also who I never get to see and who I occasionally blow off even when we have a plan to see. But his work reminds me of sort of your most beloved sitcom, something that you turn on and you love these characters and you are going to enjoy yourself thoroughly, which makes sense because Allan has an esteemed career in television. I think of just an example that's from my era, Friends or Seinfeld, and from a more modern era, Modern Family. Something you're just guaranteed to enjoy yourself. Paige. Paige reminds me of, I've had a very distinct thought about Paige that she reiterated a minute ago when she asked me, and I've thought this for years, she asked me a minute ago, weren't you on the West Coast? And what's interesting about that is I always think of Paige's work as having a distinctly Western sensibility. I'm from this side of the country, but I have spent a lot of time on the West Coast. And I always, when I think of Paige's work, I think of Walter Mosley and James Ellroy, storytelling that, again, that's recognizable, it's familiar to you, but it comes from a very different place, from the American West. But then I read some things of Paige's this morning, just in anticipation of that, and this whole analogy went to hell. Because they were great stories about romance and about things that that don't have that Western sensibility. So there you go. Alison, when I thought about doing this for Alison, I thought, well, how the hell am I going to say something interesting about Alison? she's a fucking supernova. And, but the thing is, so here's what I did, and I told her a minute ago that I did this. I went online to see what other people were saying about her, and weirdly, just completely by accident, I ended up with something I had said about her 20 years ago, when I must have been 7 or 8 years old. But, and the thing that I said, I have it right here. It was, the weird thing about this is I said she was our Jackie Robinson, which is clearly the first and last sports analogy I've ever used, and I wonder whether my old boyfriend actually gave me that. But the point is that she's transcended her media, her original art form, and made an impression on this society writ large. Think of Elvis or Maya Angelou or Meryl Streep. That's how I think of Alison. And finally, my dear friend Robert Kirby, who, among other things, I dedicated my new book to, because, well, I'll tell you about that in a while. I also left my wallet at home 45 minutes ago and have to bum $10 from him before I leave today. So I know I just added it. So when I think about Rob's, and I hope you don't mind, I'm almost done with all this, but Rob's work is about a lot of things, as all of our work is, but it's character studies of people that you could know or could be in their everyday lives, but told with such an engrossing humanity and humor and sharp observational skills that you really mourn coming to the end of the story or the book or the zine. And to me, the pop culture corollary to that is he tells you a story. Again, it's everyday stories. It's not about gangsters. It's not about politicians or the Vice President of the United States. But when I think of an HBO correlation, I think of 6 Feet Under, because when you're done with a Rob Kirby story, you feel as devastated as 6 Feet Under. There's my,
What about yourself?
Myself. Ooh, I forgot. Well, I'll tell you, I can think of, for myself, I drew Ethan Green for many, many years. And Ethan Green was a combination of a newspaper column. I looked to Armistead Maupin. I wanted to tell. I was writing a newspaper column and illustrating it. Sometimes there was a connected storyline. Sometimes there wasn't. It was sort of like a newspaper column crossed with a variety show. And I know it's ridiculous, but one of my models was the Carol Burnett show. Like that's what I was thinking of. I was going to give you something different each week, and I was going to try and entertain you, and it was important to me to be subversive while doing it, sort of to poke some sacred cows, especially in our own community. So, thank you so anyway, those are my big intros. So I guess I'll start off by asking you guys a few questions, and then I'll shut up and you guys can talk. How's that? Let me ask, how about if I ask Ed and Alison about consistency in storytelling? Obviously this is a story about sequential storytelling. And consistency is always something that I know in my own work, I think I struggle with more than any of you. I would get to a storyline and I'd say, I don't know how this is going to end, so maybe Ethan ought to go to Mars or something. So how about that? Tell me some thoughts on that.
Well, a little background on me before I started working on comics. I was a fine artist for over a decade. I was a painter and an illustrator and really tried to exist in that gallery world and failed miserably because I wasn't able to kind of advocate and talk about my work in that sort of scene as well as I'm now hopefully able to talk about my comics. So consistency, I actually reacted to your question in a little bit of a different way. Just drawing the same characters over and over again was a completely new concept for me. So much so that I'll reveal some of what's going on in my book. The first issue of Lovable Oaf, I photoshopped and then tried to make it not look like I photoshopped his face, because it's a very particular face. I was not getting the proportions down the way that I wanted it to be. And I was just like, I can't do this. I don't even know. At that point, I almost quit drawing the comic, because the actual trying to make the character look the same over and over again was very challenging for me. So starting from that baseline with that character, I decided I was going to completely come up with a different design for each individual character, so they sort of didn't look the same, so I could reinvent the wheel and hopefully be consistent in rendering them, because they all look totally different, and that readers would understand who they were, just because I felt like my repetitive drawing skills were so bad. Being a painter, I was used to doing a one and done sort of thing. But beyond that, my story really, I had the broad strokes of it, but I didn't want to tell a very straightforward love story. I wanted there to be a lot of subplots. When you talk about HBO shows and dramas that have a lot of characters and shifting plot lines, I was very influenced by that structurally with my book. So I had a thought for where I was going to go originally for the first 4 issues, which are essentially like a romantic comedy, but I wanted to queer that in the true sense of the word at every turn that I could. So I threw in most of my interests. Like, I had a palette of other interests that existed outside of the main, character love story. One of them was music. I like heavy metal music. That's I'm going to say it's atypical, but then I think of Rob Halford and how he just imprinted all over heavy metal. So, maybe it's not so atypical for
music is my next question for you.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I won't go so much there, but it became a sort of platform for me to talk about all of my interests, and the plot and the story arc actually grew out of that. And by the end of it, I had thought, because this was coming out of a failed relationship, I wanted to just do almost a pop song version of a love story in comic form. But by the end of it, I was more influenced by The Graduate, and that very ambiguous ending scene where they busted out and they ended the wedding and they get on the bus together and they're smiling, and that smile gradually dissolves into what the hell have we done. So I kind of wanted to give the date structure of my comic kind of that similar ambiguous ending with the help of Morrissey. There's a Morrissey song that plays over the whole thing that kind of lends some commentary. It's the Simon and Garfunkel of my storyline a little bit. So, but yeah.
So, Alison, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I had a lot of that same fear of drawing the same characters more than once, too. I mean, when I first started my comic strip, it wasn't really a comic strip. It was like separate characters each time. First, it was a single panel strip. Then it became an actual strip with multiple panels. But I would invent new characters for every episode because I didn't know how you did that, how you drew the same people. But eventually I kind of started running out of steam. I had to keep thinking up like pretty good material to be able to sustain anonymous characters. And at one point somebody told me about Armistead Maupin's work and said, you should do this, you should create a community. And I was like, oh my God, I can't do that.
But did the bookstore come in later than I expected, or was the bookstore pretty early? Because when I think of your strip, I think of the store and the characters related to it.
I was doing the comic strip for 4 years before the bookstore and the regular characters actually cohered. So it was all kind of random until I finally felt like I could take that leap.
Right.
And they didn't look alike. As I was talking with Howard yesterday, like you just have to trust that your readers are going to be able to identify these characters, and eventually you get in a routine of drawing them in. See,
the funny thing about that is you told me that 20 years ago, because I was angsting about this, because every strip, and I mean, this follows me to this day. I got a review of my new book yesterday where it starts out saying like, there's no, every character is not on model ever. So, and we were sitting in P-Town 20 years ago. You must have been finished with your strip for the week, but I was sitting there.
It's fun watching
because you were visiting me, but I was drawing, and that was my. I couldn't draw them the same always.
But my stuff isn't the same, and if you look at, the evolution of my drawings, it's the early stuff is terrible. It gets better and better, and then it starts to get worse and worse at the end when I got too busy to really.
Right.
put enough effort into my deadlines. But it's not consistent at all. It's just this constant flux.
Interesting. Sorry to, I think it'd be more interesting if I step in and break up the subjects a little bit, even though that seems a little artificial. So I'm going to do that now and ask Allan and Paige. I sort of flagged this when I introduced Paige, and you might disagree with my take on this, about your sense of place, but I wanted to ask you about you both about sense of place. Allan, sense of place was in the title of your strip, even though I think it was, your strip was a lot broader than one neighborhood in New York, and that neighborhood also was a stand-in for similar neighborhoods throughout the world, really. But and we're talking about Chelsea, obviously. And again, Paige, when I think of your work, I feel sort of a sense of the West, not a East Coast, like bitchy urban way of communicating, which has always been refreshing to me, because most of the fiction and the pop culture that I'm a part of comes from that, from that place. So I'll stop talking, and I start with you and ask you whether sense of place figures in your work as clearly as I seem to think it does.
It's really weird that you said that, because I think place is something I've struggled with, because I grew up in the Deep South. If you've heard me talk on a panel before, you've heard me talk about how hard it is growing up in that kind of social, sometimes constraining environment can be if you're creating something that's not mainstream. And I don't think that Jane's World really happened. I don't think Jane's World really gelled until I moved to California. And so it does have this sort of weird, the characters live in California, but they sort of have a Southern sensibility in the way that they interact with each other and treat each other.
Which, having spent some time in California's 50 million people with that connection to elsewhere, doesn't? So it
sort of, yeah.
So that, anyway.
What's weird though is that I was born in California.
Interesting.
So anyway, I've kind of come back home, but I think I said this on one of the gay panels in San Diego one year, is that that there are so many of us that grew up in places where it wasn't okay to be gay, and discovering other gay comics creators like Alison and other people I've met when I'm in at San Diego, it was sort of this bright shining light at the end of the tunnel, that you found, like this place where you felt at home, and you found like Ed and a lot of the guys I've met through Prism. It's like you suddenly have a community that makes, I don't know, I felt like I improved immensely as a cartoonist when I moved to the West Coast, which was back in like 99. And then Jane's World really, I sort of ramped up Jane's World probably in 2000, 2001. So, but I'm like you when you were talking about, I could relate to you saying your stories are kind of all over the place, because I think my characters all look the same. I think, like, from an art standpoint, I can get them on model, but I write myself into corners all the time because I don't know if I'm not paying attention, or I'm doing it late at night, or, and then I do something crazy like they get abducted by aliens from outer space, or like sort of our solutions are the same. Yeah. I send them to outer space, and then like everything suddenly makes sense again.
And actually, the strange thing about that, my former husband and my current husband both hated, there was a period where Ethan Green, they were called Gay Bars on Mars, and there was a series of strips. The weird thing about those they were about California. I had moved from Boston to Los Angeles, and to me, it was as if I had moved to Mars. So it was, I didn't want to just label it Los Angeles, so I didn't, because that didn't reach the level of weirdness that I was feeling personally, leaving Boston and ending up in LA. But anyway, Allan, what do you think about sense of place in your work?
Oh, I mean, it very much had everything to do, initially especially. The strip, we did Chelsea Boys. And by the way, I did it with a partner named Glenn Hansen, who's one of the finest illustrators and designers out there. So, even though I'm an artist too, I really got off easy when it comes to, to what you guys are talking about. He was on model every single time.
Right.
And he had kind of figured out what the characters were going to look like before we even started doing the thing. But initially it was...
What's interesting about that, I noticed in preparing for this morning, I was doing a little research. I found a model sheet. That would have been a good idea.
Yeah.
Before you spend 18 years drawing the damn thing, a model sheet.
Yeah.
Oh.
Well, both of us came from animation, from
Right,
TV
exactly.
animation. So we knew model sheets, we knew rotations, we knew how to do all of that.
Right.
Drawing in his style is fucking impossible.
Yeah.
I had to do it a few times when he was too busy. You know, hopefully nobody could tell. But we started the strip off as a lark pretty much, and it was very superficial. It was just gag driven. There was continuity from the very beginning. But it was very much about roommates in Chelsea, and it was informed by that East Coast sensibility that you were talking about. And we self-syndicated, as I guess everybody here probably did. When we first started going out to people with it outside of the East Coast, the resistance was incredible.
Right.
People would say, well, what's your strip? And we'd say, well, it's kind of Seinfeld, it's kind of Sex and the City, it's New York. And they would say, who the fuck wants to read that? We're out in Oklahoma.
Absolutely.
Or you know, London.
Well, I don't know, Alison, whether you experienced that, but your setting was less definitive. I mean,
No, mine was intentionally very vague, so
Right.
no one could imagine it was their town.
But
And
I see
somehow knew it was
Minneapolis and
Vermont,
surrounds. I see Roaring Park and stuff.
See-
I see Lake of the Isles.
See, and I see like
Nobody's wearing
Holyoke
kilts anywhere.
or you know, a collegey sort of middle-sized city.
That's what it felt like. Yeah.
But, and I know I started to obscure, when I first started doing my strip, it was very much about Boston. And but I quickly veered away from that because I wanted to sell it to newspapers in Dallas and in Indianapolis.
You had all those beautiful, like, Boston those brick buildings with their bay windows.
I did until about 3 or 4 years in, and then the only thing that I couldn't give up was P-Town. Then I would keep drawing P-Town, but it was an issue in selling it.
Absolutely. And it took, for me, it took quite a while to break people down.
Right.
Ironically, well, actually, it's kind of expected. The very first publication to pick us up outside of New York was London.
Right.
Because they have a Chelsea.
Oh, that's funny.
Yeah.
That's funny.
So, I mean, we ran for about 10 years. 10 years in New York, 9 years in London, and about almost as long all over the world,
Right.
which was a lot of fun. But the strip, to answer your original question, the strip became less about Chelsea and more about people. And our storytelling got more sophisticated as we went along. We realized we had a forum. We could talk about what concerned us, what bugged the shit out of us. You know, we could get into politics. We could get into things that were going on in our own lives. One of our main characters' mother developed Alzheimer's. I was going through it at the same time with my mother. I mean, it was actually very cathartic.
Suarez? Who Suarez?
No, it was Nathan.
Nathan.
Nathan's mother was losing it. Yeah.
Interesting. So if, has anybody else want to weigh in on that, or can I move to a new question? Okay. The next question I'd like to bring up is something that I've always admired about Rob's work. It's forgive me, I was talking of very broad themes, and now I'm talking about something specific. But I know that it's something that you care about, and I'm learning it's something Ed cares about too. And I was flipping through my books the other day thinking, there is not a single musical reference in 4 books. Do you ever even listen to the radio? Like, what's the matter? So, but I'd like to talk about music. Because I think music was always, your strip was musical, and it was always present in your work, I think. So,
I guess a friend of mine, Terrence Greep, he's a wrestler. I was drawing a little thing, a story he did for the book Queer, and I was planning to go see him wrestle. He's the openly gay wrestler, and I never got up the courage to go. But he said, "Oh, you're a method actor then, you know, because I felt like I should go and soak up that stuff before I, go." But yeah, music really. music is really very important to me, and I listen to music when I'm inking and drawing, not when I'm writing, obviously.
And you add lyrics. I mean, your episodes are often narrated.
Yeah. And sometimes I worry, sometimes I worry, am I going to get sued or something? Actually, I have a collection that I'm going to do with Northwest Press next year. It's not going to be a curbside collection. It's going to be like all kinds of random stories, and there's going to be new stuff too. But it's going to be kind of like a themed anthology collection of my older work and newer work, and I'm going to use the title of my story from Queer. And it's called Music for No Boyfriends, and other stories.
I didn't even know that.
Because I realized so many of those stories, like Instruction, the story I did that's in No Straight Lines that Justin did, and stories that I did with, like even Stephen Winter, the story I did with him for Juicy Mother Dollface. Music plays an integral part in that, and I realized so many of those stories are the music is. It's your boyfriend when you don't have a boyfriend or a lover, when you're in between and you're angst-filled, younger, and so much of these stories have been about younger people navigating this terrifying world of gay male sexuality, because thank God it's gotten better now, but back in the day it was, you had to kind of make it up yourself.
Absolutely.
And,
Absolutely.
and that's how I also...
Or you read that Paul Monet book and Becoming a Man. And that's how you that's how I figured it out.
So Ethan, Ethan he didn't seem to get solace in music. Music wasn't his boyfriend, generally speaking. He didn't bring up...
This jumps to a different question, but it's a good place to ask it. I like music, but I don't think I draw on it. I'm a big reader. I admit I read a lot more fiction, literary fiction, than I do comics. I like a lot of history.
I just finished your book.
But
it was like
when it comes to I often thought that I don't even know whether people still read this book, but World According to Garp. Have you guys read World According to Garp?
Totally, late 70s.
Yeah, because when I can remember the specific moment as a college freshman reading World According to Garp and thinking well, that's it, I'm coming out. What's weird was who my model was to be a gay man, and some of this is mentioned in Ethan, but I've mentioned it in later stories too. My model was Garp's mom, Jenny Garp, who was a straight woman. But in the story, she becomes famous. She's a nurse. She impregnates herself with a guy in a coma because she wants to have a baby. It's the 40s, and, all of that is shocking. And then she writes a novel about it called Sexual Suspect. And that's, to me, what being gay was like. And if this nurse in New Hampshire, which is where I was actually, could come out, so could I, even though she wasn't.
There's also an incredible trans character in the story.
Yeah, absolutely.
Roberta.
Right. So, sorry, but back to music.
I assume Ed does this too. You put on your Smiths records, right? Sometimes when you're working, or maybe a lot. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, it just got me. That was my mid '80s. He was my god.
Sure.
Yeah, and it's not so much anymore. I love Morrissey. He's got a place in my heart, but he's not a constant anymore.
He kind of opens his mouth at the wrong times nowadays, and I've sort of slowly moved away from references to him.
Yeah, just integrate, yeah.
My stick with music was growing up in the 80s, my parents would not get cable, so I grew up without MTV. So I would listen to all this music that my friends were always talking about that there were videos to, but I would make up videos in my head. I would listen to it and I would, narrativize it and visualize it in my head. So when I started to make creative work, artwork, whether it was paintings or what have you, on down to the comic, it was always going to be influenced by music. There are characters in the comic. Eiffel is named after the Pixies song Alec Eiffel, and there's a lyric stands in the archway, and the first time you see Eiffel, he's standing in an archway. So it's just seeded with all of these little musical cues that I put it in there because I wanted to make an instant connection with people based on that. Putting the Smiths lyrics in there, putting the Morrissey stuff in there, having a quote from a Smiths song at the beginning of every issue that kind of set the tone for the issue, was a way for me to make that meta commentary, but also then immediately connect with the people. And I've had people that say, I love your book, but I hate Morrissey and I hate the Smiths and Morrissey ruined my life and, this, that, and the other thing. So I sort of became aware of how much it was becoming it was overtaking things a bit. I wanted to focus more on the characters, but I made that initial connection with readers based on a lot of the music stuff. And then my experience with being a gay heavy metal fan, I felt like really hadn't been explored in comics either. So I went out of my way to work all of that into the comic as well, to the point where one of my favorite bands is Slayer. And I talk about trademark and litigation potential. Two of my characters stalk Kerry King from Slayer in a comic, and I tried to be really respectful. I didn't queer him. I didn't pull a Henry and Glenn on him at all. But he's in there and he's speaking kind of in his voice. So I wanted to make sure that was a part of the comic for those gay guys out there, or queer women, just queer people in general that liked heavy metal but didn't see any stories about it.
And I think that struck me early on. That you were sort of giving a voice to, it's a constant source of frustration, I think, for all gay people for the rest of the world to assume that, well, gay people are like this. I think we all probably run into it every day. My mother is, what good is having a gay son that doesn't give a damn about ballet or opera or,
Oh, God. So I have a story that happened since I've been here at the Eagle. I went to the drink and draw and I was wearing my Slayer shirt, and someone who knows me from Facebook came up to me and said, I always see you wearing heavy metal shirts on Facebook and stuff. You're being ironic, right? You don't actually like that.
Well,
and I was like, what?
What? This is one of the first things I thought, is that you're giving a voice to, in storytelling to people that haven't heard their story told.
Yeah.
And that's fascinating.
But my hackles were raised. I was accused of being Lindsay Lohan or Paris Hilton or whoever is wearing like a Quiet Riot shirt or ironic. I was like,
And speaking of shirts, we should point out that he's wearing Beavis and Butthead making
it's
love.
probably not. I forget I'm wearing it sometimes,
metal.
so I get some strange reactions when I'm, in the grocery store or whatever. I forget. I have to button up if there are kids around, obviously. So.
You're not entirely, but what the hell? You mentioned your character Eiffel, and I told you this a minute ago. Everyone up here has a character that at some point or other, probably right now, I'd like to have sex with, like Lois of Allison's Lois. I adored, and I got such a kick out of her. She was so funny. And I thought, well, I'm not a 20-year-old lesbian, but I would hop into bed with her right
She would
now.
hop into bed with
That's what I figured. That's what I figured. Probably even still. So, weirdly, Paige has a character, just an adorable straight man named Ethan, who the name caught my attention early on.
Why's that?
Sorry about that. And both these guys have characters called Nathan, who are very different, but who I...
Total coincidence.
Exactly, who I...
Let's make it weird, Eric. Eiffel's based on me. Eiffel is me,
well then.
so let's make it weird.
We'll do a sex show right here. Anyway, so this is... and this is a good enough segue into a subject that's gone over and over and over, but I think it's still worthwhile. And I think all of us, even Alison, probably now struggle with, what still is off limits in publishing. Probably especially Alison, because it's what's off limits in mainstream publishing is different than what Fantagraphics is willing to publish. So I wanted to quickly touch on sex, drugs, and politics as and how those things were handled in each of our. So, Alison, you want to start?
One thing that was really great about drawing Dykes to Watch Out For was nobody could edit it. I would send it off to the newspapers; they'd get it at the last minute, and they just have to paste it down and. Usually, I don't think editors even looked at it, but sometimes they would. But very rarely was I ever asked to change anything. Once someone objected, was the Washington Post
Blade.
was the
Blade.
Washington Blade was always very squeamish about like nipples or curse words, and so
that's the one that I can remember too. And finally, I started to just all right, I would send it back to them, with the black bar over the guy's crotch, like,
Yeah, I did some black bars for them. Right. But mostly, it really wasn't an issue. I was publishing in these gay papers that were filled with, the sex phone ads, and it was all like just a lot of...
So what about, one thing I don't know whether you had this, I mean, I was in Boston, and early on, I was very mad at the Cardinal. Cardinal Bernard Law, he became sort of notorious during the sex scandals, but this was earlier. He was pretty obnoxious about AIDS, about HIV, and how to deal with that. And I did some nasty drawings of the Cardinal, and that got me in trouble. Did you ever run into any political boundaries?
No, I never did anything that daring. That's really good.
We got censored a couple times. You wouldn't think it would happen there, but it happened in L.A.
Really?
There were times we were trying to do strips. And by the way, to answer the question, fearlessly, just do anything you want, because as Alison said, nobody was really editing.
Right.
Nobody was telling us what to do. It was a free forum.
Right.
But we did a strip about prejudice within the gay community.
Oh, right.
And Frontiers, I think, is the paper out there. They refused to run the strip.
Right.
And they said, you can't. It was about prejudice against Asian people within the gay community, and they refused to run it. Their advertisers were furious,
right.
And it was a shock to us. And our point was, how do you write a story about prejudice without showing prejudice? They say All in the Family couldn't get on the air today. I'm not sure I believe that anymore, but yeah, so it happens.
Allan, that's the thing. It's I ran into censorship too, and I remember being kind of shocked by the stuff I would hear. They wouldn't run. I actually had to adjust drawings because there was a key plot point. It was like a big shock, somebody's sleeping with somebody else. And you saw the butt, and they said, well, we just they had a new no bare butts policy. Oh, no. And I think that happened as we became, the publications became more mainstream, and they started having to serve the advertisers, which of course I didn't like hearing that. It was gross, but
Except
I had to draw the underpants on the butt.
I have to say, like nobody, so long ago, but I have to put out a shout out for the handful of alt weeklies who were publishing me. And I think Alison had more than I did, but I think of the Baltimore City paper in particular. They were bold about, they had decided they were alternative, even though they were mainstream, and they were, bring it on, show the guy stick going,
Yeah, they ran Alison and I, the New York Press. Do you remember that, Alison?
Oh, right.
Yeah.
It was that kind of right-wing meeting. And I just sold out and did it because they paid really well.
Right.
$50 a strip back then was good, or was it even more maybe? I don't know. And they gave me illustration gigs, and it was, and I had a backlog, and they were really out to get the Village Voice. They hated the Village Voice, and so they thought, hey, we'll get some gay strips in here, and we'll show them we're just as gay, and I never trusted them for a minute. When I moved out from New York, they dropped me, and I saw it coming, but it was a good run. I got some money out of it.
It was, because the Village Voice would never run us, so fuck them.
Right, yeah, absolutely.
You did that brilliant strip about being, it was in Juicy Mother, right? The one, the nonconformist. I love that strip so much.
I have no memory of what you're talking about.
It was about
it's
it was about being a gay cartoonist.
Oh.
Yeah, my oppressed minority.
Oh, don't talk about that, because I'm going to talk about it in my keynote.
Oh, sweet. Okay. Listen to that.
My thought about this is sort of akin to Alan's. That the time that I got in the most trouble, and it was important to me to write something that was subversive, is the word that I kept above my drawing table. I wanted it to be I wanted it to be funny more than anything else, but I wanted it to be a little bit uncomfortable. And this is, when I think back on this, I just think I was sort of a brat, but after Versace was killed in South Beach, he was killed by Versace, obviously a fancy designer, clothing designer, and he was killed by a troubled gay guy. Right. Sort of clearly a troubled guy, but a guy like 1,000 people I knew.
Yeah. That's
And-
what was really scary about it.
Right. And I wrote a strip about that. I know it's, you shouldn't gun anybody down, but that I was trying, what I was groping for was sort of materialism in a very privileged slice of gay male America. And this kid snapped. And who did he kill? He killed, the person who was sitting on
The epitome of that.
exactly. And
Avatar.
it made sense to me. I'm not saying I thought, so it still makes sense to me. See, I'm getting all,
But those were the circles he ran in. I mean, this kid was a climber. He was trying to hang out with famous people, accomplished people. He was never going to achieve anything like that on his own.
Absolutely.
Right.
But I had my strip expressed some empathy to being in that place.
Yeah.
And boy, did that, I still remember it was 47 papers said no.
Oh, really?
So, yeah. And to this day, I'm sheepish about it. I didn't put it in my new book.
You didn't?
So,
I was just going to chime in and say, because I work with a mainstream syndicate for online, so you wonder, newspapers have some standards because it would what they always said to me was it's delivered to somebody's house or somebody buys it, so it's sitting there, right? So that's why they care about what's on the page or what a kid is going to come across or whatever. So you would think online syndication, well, you'd have a lot more freedom, right? But if the online syndication is an arm of the mainstream syndicate that sends the comic out, they were still following the same rules. So I thought, well, let's see how far you can go, right? So show a shower scene, and it's all you see is just you can't show. But I found out last week, I have a new editor who's this young woman now. So I sent her some stuff ahead of time. I was like, can I show this? And it's it's basically Ethan's straight guy visualizing his dream of girls getting together.
I was going to say, because
two girls are
in the shower.
yeah, no, it wasn't him in the shower. It was one of the other girls. But he injects himself into one of Jane's dating screw ups, where her ex-girlfriend or her new girlfriend are making out, and she goes, "No, they didn't make out. It's just in his little sick fantasy." But what happened was they're groping each other's breasts, and I was like, "Okay, well, I can't show a butt cheek. Can I show that?" Yeah. Apparently, yes. As long as as long as they're still wearing their bras, you can show it's just really weird where the lines are so, and you can't.
Cleavage, no bottom.
Yeah, and you can show underwear and boxer shorts, and you can't say ass. I still can't say ass, but I said to my editor,
say it again.
Ass. But I said, lame ass doesn't sound as funny as lame. Lame butt does not sound as funny as lame ass. There's some words you just have to have ass after it, or otherwise the joke doesn't work.
After Jack, you really want to say ass.
Yeah, it's funny. And then some people they'll I've done the black box too, or I'll just go ahead and delete a comic and run it on the blog and say, put it in the comments, hey dude, it's on the blog if you want to go check out the full scene, But anyway, it's just funny, the nuances of what is okay and what's not okay. And you would think, given where we are in other media outlets, that you can do all of this stuff.
You would, but it's not.
But in a way, it's a sign of our own success. Originally, this stuff was running in bar rags. That's where you got the paper. It wasn't out on the corner in the newspaper box like it is now. So.
Are they even running them anymore?
I was going to say, I haven't been in many newspaper boxes lately.
Yeah, I know.
Mine's only in Charlotte now. That's the last holdout.
Is that right?
Charlotte. Yeah, it was in Dallas and Charlotte. Those were the last two. After
Well, newspapers are disappearing
Right.
too, so it's we're part of that.
But let me ask you, let me switch gears a minute. Do we still have, how much? We got time, right?
Oh, funny.
Okay. Again, in terms of a subject that I think is important to sequential storytelling, and one with that I've thought a lot about in the last couple of years with the advent of the HBO show Girls, which is sort of, I have read regularly that it's a show without any likable central characters. And I don't know whether I agree with that or not, but the likability of your main character is something I wanted to, or your core characters is something I wanted to ask you guys about, like whether you thought that that's a essential kind of succeeding in storytelling.
I'll take that one.
Yeah.
Well, first of all, I like a lot of the characters on Girls. They're just really fucked up people, and they're trying their best. And I think Hannah's a wonderful character, and I don't want. I said this in one of the other. I want flawed, real people with problems and
but in particular, and I hear where you're going. But how about just pure? And again, it's very subjective. Who's likable and who isn't?
Yeah.
But what about a character that's like a central character, but that is not likable?
Like Todd in your strip he's a horrible guy, you know.
But not a central character. Like,
yeah. Well, that's true. Yeah.
How about like the Brian in Queer as Folk?
Oh yeah, yeah. Oh, I hate it. I hated that show.
But again, those are. I guess that's it. And take it wherever you guys want to go with it, and I'll be quiet. But just for people starting, or even when I want to start something new, this comes up in my head. Does the character around which the story centers need to be pleasing in some way, or can they be?
I think if you capture their humanity in some way, then I'll go. I, for one, will go anywhere. If you can really capture that truth, I mean, to sound corny, I'll do it. And I feel like that character Hannah on Girls. I believe this. I believe this woman exists. I mean, she just really feels real to me, and I'm just transfixed by the things she does. And sometimes, no, don't. She's a queen of self-sabotage, but.
But she feels real.
She feels real. I'll go with her.
I think that makes her likable.
Yeah.
There's a show called Looking on HBO. It's just been canceled.
Yeah.
But the central character in there is not really likable at all.
He's infuriating sometimes.
Yeah.
But I mostly believe it. My husband doesn't like the character at all. But yeah, I like the older guy on that show actually.
Ed, what do you think?
Yeah, I was sort of going through how to respond to this. The Oath character started life as the paper doll design that people kind of reacted strongly to, and then I decided to make a shirt, and it's just him. You probably kind of can't see, but it's him in pose, and he's naked, and he's mostly nude. He's very hairy. He has pink nipples. He has pink eyes, pink teeth. And he's wearing underwear that has that was many people's character as I was working on the comic via a T-shirt that I sort of just put out ahead of the book, and people react so strongly to it. And of course, at first it was gay men that looked like were like saying, "Oh, this is a celebration of me. This is wonderful," and it's not that there weren't expressions of that character out, but for some reason that has become kind of associated with him, that they responded to it on a different level. So as I got to starting to work on the comic, I felt this real obligation to make sure that I